Welcome to church. Welcome to church. My name is Jordan. My wife Amy and I have the privilege of pastoring our West Hills campus. So if you do not know who I am, nice to meet you. It's good to have you here today. I'm so excited of the opportunity I get to speak today. Amy's out in the West Shore leading our team out there. They're having a great Sunday there. They have a youth service happening that I've heard rumors that I think it's going to make its way here next week. You know, things start in the West Shore and they make their way here, right? That's how it works. I don't know about you, but looking on your social media pages and having conversations with over coffee and different things, this seems to be a hard time of year. There's many factors for it, but nevertheless, we just seem to be in a funk this time of year. And maybe it's because we haven't seen the sun for weeks. Yesterday was the first time we saw it. We know it still exists and it's still there and the sun's still in the sky, but weeks on weeks of rain. It's a hard time of year. Maybe it's because the optimism that we've had around the new year and the new decade and our resolutions, I'm going to bring it up, and our goals that we made at the beginning of the year are now bust for some of them, myself included. I haven't gone to the gym as much as I should have this last week. It's the time of year, it's the shorter days, it's the credit card bills coming in for how much we spend on our mother-in-law over Christmas and realizing, was that a good decision? It's all these things, they pile onto one another and it piles and we feel stuck. It just feels like a hard time. It feels like, when it's raining, it's pouring, that life just feels full, it feels heavy, that it's hard to get the next foot ahead of the other. It's hard to keep on going. The obstacles seem real. The trials seem a lot, and you just feel stuck. So how do you keep on moving? How do you keep on going when you feel stuck? Or how do you get up when you feel like you've been pushed down? How do you get up again? Well, that virtue around this idea of continue to get up even after being pushed down or continue to run in the spite of the circumstances of our life, that virtue is called resilience. Resilience could probably best be described like this. This is what resilience is. A guy who bought a house with a bamboo stand growing near his driveway. He decided to get rid of it, so he cut it down, then took an axe to its roots and smashed them into little pieces. He dug down and removed as much of the root system as he could, and then he poured a plant poison over what remained. He filled the hole with several feet of gravel, and then taking no chances, paved it over with cement. 2 years later, he noticed something. A little green bamboo shoot pushing up through the cement. That's resilience. That's resilience. It's this ability to keep on running when you feel like you're getting hit from every direction. It's the ability to keep getting up after every circumstance, every trial, every sorrow, every obstacle just seems so heavy right in front of you. Resilience. Now, resilience is something that for some of us, we think that we don't really know if we have it till we've lived long enough in life. And so I'm a little bit out of my depth because I haven't lived long enough to know if I'm truly a resilient person or not. Some of us believe that resilience is just based on personality. It's that some of us are just simply born with this optimism and we're more resilient than others. Some of us think like, we just got to live life to a certain amount of years, then we'll know if we're resilient or not. But resilience is not based on your personality. Resilience is not based on how optimistic you are about life. Resilience, and we should be encouraged here, resilience can be learned. All the research demonstrates that resilience can be learned. You can learn resilience before you need it. Resilience is a significant virtue, but the question still remains, why do some people just seem to have this tenacity, to have this grit to keep on going, and others seem to get stuck in the ditch? The story of Christianity, the history of Christianity, is littered with all kinds of resilient people. If you read about how Christianity is today, if you read about the history, you would see character after character that showed great resilience, great tenacity, great grit, in face of many obstacles and even death. In spite of all that, they kept on going, proclaiming the message of Jesus. But perhaps one character more than any others demonstrates resilience on a scale that we're just not accustomed to. And that character is the Apostle Paul. Paul, if you read Acts or if you read any of the New Testament, Paul is that individual that had this radical transformation with Jesus. Experienced Jesus in this radical way and was so convinced and so compelled and so moved that he began to go around the Mediterranean to all the hubs, all the cities, all the main urban areas, and he began to tell people about Jesus. But wherever Paul went, it wasn't though there was a hotel waiting for him and a parade. He had very little fanfare. In fact, most places he received lots of obstacles. He received people refuting him or making fun of him or objecting to what he's saying, or he was bullied. Prison. He was put in prison. He was tortured. He was stoned. He went and shipwrecked. He was poisoned. The list goes on and on and on and on. Paul experienced so much trial in his life. But the man just kept on going. It's like the Energizer Bunny. He just didn't stop. He just kept on going. So listen, if you're here today, and if you're a skeptic, if you're unsure of this whole Jesus thing, listen, you don't have to believe or adhere to everything Paul believed, but there's a level of respect you have for the man. Because the man the individual demonstrated resilience on a level that we just do not see very often. He was such a person with such tenacity and grit that nothing seemed to stop him. As Paul traveled and planted all these churches, he would go to these places that they've never heard about Jesus. There was no existing churches. He was the first one in town. He was the first church he would establish. And so he went to this place called Corinth. And Corinth had a reputation in the ancient world, and it wasn't a reputation for a place where a church would start. But Paul went there, and I could see his friends probably getting around. Paul knows there's no point. You're wasting your time going to Corinth. They'll never believe in Jesus. They'll never accept that message. Nevertheless, Paul went because he was resilient. He shows up in Corinth, and the amazing thing is, dozens, if not hundreds of people came to the life-giving relationship with Jesus. He spent a year and a half there. He had conversations with them. He saw the freedom of Jesus tangibly in front of him. Lives being transformed, families being restored. But then, like he does, he goes to plant some more churches. But over time, he starts to hear these reports. He starts to hear things from Corinth about how everything's not going so well. How people are giving up on their faith. How people are leaving or they're adopting other worldviews or different practices and the things imploding. And so out of great concern, remember, Paul spent a year and a half with these people. He looked into their eyes and saw the mist forming as they talked about Jesus and how they'd given up their addictions and how they found freedom in a brand new way. And he saw them. He saw the transformation. So when Paul hears that the whole thing is combusting, he writes a letter, several letters. Corinth was a troublesome place. It was out of all the churches, out of all Paul's quote-unquote children, that of all these churches he planted, Corinth gave him the most trouble. He writes 2 entire letters that we have in our New Testament. Scholars think there's more, and they're long and detailed about all the things that the Corinthians are doing that they shouldn't be doing. They provided the most headache for Paul. Just, if you're a parent, you know that you have one child that causes you more misery than the rest. You love them all the same, but one just gives you more headaches than the rest of them do. That was me growing up. I was the middle child, so I was confused, didn't know my spot, couldn't control my emotions. Lego became my best friend growing up. This was the Corinthians. This was the church of Corinth. They were in a lot of mess, and so Paul writes them a letter to try to correct some thinking, but try to help them on their journey. And in this letter, he talks about everything. He talks about sexual immorality and what you should do with your money and apostleship. And he talks about singleness and marriage. And he talks about all sorts of different things. He addresses all the issues they have. And then he stops. Around halfway through the letter, Paul stops. And he almost speaks on this grandeur level. He wants to deposit something in the Corinthians that he knows that they need. He says, listen, I could address every issue that you have in your life. I could talk about every circumstance, every trial, every problem, everything that's facing you, but I want to deposit something in you that's so much more significant. I want to deposit something in you that you need, followers of Jesus. You need this if you're going to run the race in which God has set before you. He tells them about the value of resilience. So in chapter 9, verse 24, he takes a pause and he uses this analogy to communicate the importance of resilience. This is what he says in chapter 9, verse 24. Don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. So some context here. Paul's saying, so don't you realize, or don't you know, in other words, as you've seen, now he's speaking to the Corinthians, and at this time in Corinth, every 2 years, there was these massive games, second only to the Olympics, huge, where there would be racing and wrestling and boxing and all these sorts of games. So most Corinthians would have sat in this arena, would watch a race happen, where racers would run around the track. And Paul says, as you know, as you've seen with your own eyes in that arena, as you've watched those racers, just those athletes run with such grit and such determination, they all run, but only one of them gets the prize. So run to win. Now, some clarity here. Every analogy falls apart at one point. Paul's not saying that, listen, there's one prize and us all Christians, we're in competition for this one prize, so let's just go at it. No, he's saying, listen, there is a prize. There's a point to life. There's a point to life. And in other words, Paul's saying, hey, it's not just as important as that you started the race. It's not even as important how fast you run on that race. It's not even important how you run in that race if you fall several times. The point is that you keep on running. You run in a way to win. You have this grit, you have this determination to keep on going, that nothing slows you down, nothing stops you, nothing keeps you down. Now, this is not just some simply halftime pump-up speech that Paul's telling them here, because he knows the Corinthians. He knows the stories. He knows how they've given in to temptation, how they've lived in the freedom of Jesus, and they've got lazy. And they've just kind of accepted everything, and they've given in, and they have no determination. They're not resilient individuals, and he knows that. So he's just not trying to pump them up. He's trying to tell them about something about life. He's trying to tell them something of an aspect of life that's so important. And that is, life is not defined. Life is not defined by your triumphs. It's defined how you respond to your trials. Paul's saying, listen, Corinthians, you've had a great season here. You've had a great start, and now you're experiencing trials. Now you experience obstacles. Now you're experiencing hardships. Those moments, Paul says, is what defines you, is what makes you, is what really clarifies who you really are in those moments. Life is defined not just in the triumphs of life, but more in how we respond to our trials. So he's like, hey, Paul knows what everyone knows about life, that it gets hard. The circumstances happen out of our control. Things just happen. We didn't expect to be here. We didn't think that diagnosis was going to happen. We didn't think that relationship was going to end. We didn't think we'd be in this financial situation. And Paul says the journey in which Jesus calls us to, the journey that we get to live on, the beautiful race we run, is made in those moments. It's defined of how we respond in those moments. So in other words, Paul's saying, hey, it's about how you respond after the worst quarter you've had in your business. It's how you respond after the worst year in your marriage. It's how you respond after you failed out of university. It's how you respond after that financial break. It's how you respond in those moments, Paul is saying, is so important to this journey, because you're going to fall. Falling is inevitable on the race. You will fall at points, but the point is that you're resilient, that you get up and you keep on going. See, Paul wants us to get to another mountaintop, but he knows between every mountain is a valley. And what defines you and what helps you carry on is to run through those valleys, to continue to move forward. Paul says, run to win. Don't take a nap, don't give up, don't just stay in that season, but you gotta keep on going. So that's great, Paul. Thanks. Maybe that's just your life and you live in a reality that we don't live in. So the question is, how do we keep on going? How do we become resilient people? Because remember, we can learn this. Well, Paul helps us with this. He carries on, he builds on this analogy, and he gives us a couple habits of resilient people. A couple keys to help us understand how do we become resilient. This is what he says. Moving on in verse 25, he unpacks it for us. How do we become resilient? This is what he says. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away. But we do it, Corinthians, followers of Jesus, we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with great purpose. I am not just simply shadow boxing, have no idea what I'm doing or who I'm in competition with. Oh no, but every box, every hit has intention. I have great determination. I have great purpose. I have great vision for my life. Paul's saying, listen, as you see those athletes in that arena in the first century outside of Corinth, Corinthians, as you see them, they do all of that training, all that discipline, all that determination, all that agony. You know why they do that all? For a wreath that will go on their head and a few days later will wither and die. But, he says, but Corinthians, do not forget that we live for eternal purpose. We're speaking about life and death here. There's things bigger, there's things more significant than that's just what's in front of you. He's reminding them as followers of Jesus, there's a purpose that's bigger than you and I. It's a purpose that has eternal reality. And he wants to connect them back to that purpose. He wants to remind them to that. Now, if you're a guest, you should know that we talk about purpose a lot here at church. And some of you are like, here we go, purpose, I got it. And so some of you are like kind of tuning me out because you think purpose is this mumbo-jumbo Christianity stuff or this airy-fairy type thing. But Harvard Business Review wrote this great little book called Resilience, a little white book. It's a quick read. And one of the main things they determined and their research demonstrated is that resilient people create meaning out of their suffering. In other words, that we all suffer, but they create meaning out of it. This is what they say. This dynamic of meaning making, in other words, this reality of having a purpose, a vision for your life, is what most researchers would agree the way resilient people build bridges from their present day hardships to a fuller, better constructed future. In other words, resilient people create meaning in the trials and the circumstances of life to build a bridge to a better reality in which they feel their purpose is calling them to. When I have a bad day, or I experience a setback, and yes, pastors do have bad days. When I experience a setback or hardship or just having a discouraging day, one of the simplest practices that I do all the time is I get out of my office and I just begin to walk these streets. Just walk. I have no destination, I have no purpose, but every face that I walk by, every single one, I'm reminded is created in the image of God. And I'm reminded with every single face, the reality of the statistics in Greater Victoria, that there's a small percentage of them that have no life-giving relationship with Jesus. Oh man, and Jesus has just changed my life. He's made me a better me. He's just changed everything. I could not imagine a life without Jesus. So every person I walk by, I'm just reminded of the purpose to my life. I'm reminded of the vision that's right before me, and that's to tell more and more people about Jesus. So listen, I get back to my office, or I get back to my circumstance, and listen, the obstacle might have not moved. The circumstance still might be there. The hardship still might be present, but I've created a bridge to the reality which I want to step into. I've created a bridge that's connected to meaning and purpose. You have to have an imagined picture of the future. Resilient people have imagined picture of the future. So listen, you might be down on the ground, but you see the end zone. You see the line in which you're going to. You see the end of the race. You see there's a point to where you're going. You need to have a picture of the future. You need to have vision and purpose to your life. Helen Keller experienced many trials in her life. Helen Keller, by the age of 2, became blind and deaf in a moment. I can't even imagine. You can't see and you can't hear. But Helen was an extremely resilient person, so much so that she became educated. She learned how to read and write. She became the first blind deaf person to receive a Bachelor of Arts. She goes on to write several books. She goes on to be an activist for several different campaigns. You know what she says? She's quoted as saying, that's just like, in one of her books, this is what she says: the only thing worse than being blind is having sight with no vision. The only thing worse than being blind, I can tell you, it's someone that can see, they have sight, but they have no vision, they have no purpose to their life. There's no meaning that's getting them up out of the bed in the morning. There's no purpose that's moving them, that's in their bones, that's just fire behind every decision that they make. Paul's reminding the Corinthians, just as he's reminding you, Victorians, that there's great purpose to your life. So don't be a shadow boxer. Some of us, our lives, we look like we're shadow boxing. We just have no idea what we're living for. Paul says, be reminded of the vision and the purpose of your life. It's an eternal reality. He goes on in verse 27 to say this: I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself be disqualified. I discipline my body. The original language is I submit my body into submission. I submit my body into discipline. I make it do what it should. I discipline myself. Why? Because if I don't, I'm afraid that I'll do something or I'll make a decision that will disqualify me for telling more and more people about Jesus. And to Paul, that would be the worst reality. I discipline myself. This word shows up over and over again, but this is Paul's second habit of being resilient. Build discipline. Verse 25, all athletes are disciplined in training. Verse 27, I discipline my body like an athlete. You know the word athlete originally means agony. If you're a professional athlete, you know that's pretty close to the truth. Professional athletes experience great agony. They put their body through ruthless training. They have strict diets. They can't go out on Friday nights. They can't drink what they want or go where they want. They're always training. They experience great agony, great discipline to accomplish the goals set before them. And Paul's saying we need to be like an athlete. 2 weeks ago today, Kobe Bryant, his daughter, and 7 others tragically died in a helicopter crash. It's tragic. Kobe was an amazing athlete, though. Kobe Bryant demonstrated discipline on another level. I remember growing up watching Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal and the LA Lakers. I grew up on the East Coast of Canada, so that means I had to stay up to 10:30 to watch the West Coast games. And back then, the East Coast sucked. I don't know if they still suck, but back then they did. So I just always stayed up to watch the West Coast games. They just were always better. So I'd sneak in, pretend to go to bed, and sneak in and watch the games. And I remember Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, and some of you grew up watching them, and the LA Lakers, and it was such an exciting basketball time. But I remember a game Kobe lost. They lost by a lot. And I remember the following game, game 3, I think it was game 2 of the series, I don't remember which one. But I remember the announcer or the commentator commenting that after the game, after Kobe lost, after he experienced a setback, after he experienced a trial, what did he do? He didn't have a big bowl of ice cream. He didn't go home and sleep it off. He didn't go have drinks with the boys. He went to the gym to work on his jump shot. Right after the game, he went straight to the gym, work on his jump shot. His percentage was bad that game. He didn't want it to be the reality for the next game. Kobe Bryant was famous for calling his trainer at 5:30 in the morning saying, hey, I need to work some things out in my game. Like right now? Yeah, like right now. Can you get to the gym? He'd be like, okay. The trainer would get there around 6:30, and Kobe would be drenched. He would just be full of sweat. It looked like he's been running for hours. Kobe Bryant won 5 NBA championships. He demonstrated discipline, and Paul connects the two for us, and he says, listen, if we're gonna run the race set before us, if we're gonna be people of resilience, we need to be disciplined. We need to have great discipline. Now, I know that word's not really cool, discipline. It's probably not a goal or resolution that many of you came up with. Probably very few of you, your goal of the word of the year is discipline. But as we talk about all these virtues in this series, you know, the heart or one of the main aspects behind a lot of them is discipline. Discipline is what builds resilience. Discipline is what moves you forward. It's an older concept, but Paul wants you to know that you cannot have resilience unless you're willing to give some things up. As I studied and as I researched about characters that demonstrate resilience in history and today, almost all of them were highly disciplined people. They portrayed resilience to get up earlier. They had uncommon habits. They prioritized the right things. They gave up on other things. They demonstrated discipline. So Paul's saying, listen, as you run in this life and as you're getting tired, your muscles are aching, and you get cramps, you just got to be disciplined. You have to be a person that's disciplined, that has a purpose in what you're setting forth. But you got to build those rhythms around you because this life is just going to take so much from you. Paul helps us understand resilient people, they live on purpose and they build discipline. But Paul has a third point. It's not actually explicitly said in this passage, but it's in his entire letter. In fact, he began the letter talking about this. And he wants you to realize, and he wants the Corinthians to realize, don't neglect the spiritual. Paul starts off his letter saying, don't neglect the spiritual. He makes a distinction between wisdom and spiritual matters and living in the Spirit. He breaks this down. But he doesn't want the Corinthians, and he doesn't want you today to realize there's a spiritual element to our resilience. About a year and a half ago, I just started at West Hills. Amy and I started leading out there. And at the same time, there was a pastor, a church planter in the Lower Mainland that just was doing really well. His church was growing, culture was vibrant, team was growing, worship was impactful. And he was so gracious enough to give me some time, and we talked over the phone. And I just wanted to ask him some questions and just learn what he's doing. Like similar probably in your industry, if someone's doing well, you have to lean in and find out what the silver bullet is, if there is one. I was the same way. So I called them and I started asking them questions. Okay, how big's your team? Okay, what's your Sunday format? Okay, how long is your work? Just all these detailed type questions. Tell me about your team structure and how does your leadership development work and all this. But halfway through the conversation, he stopped me. He said, Jordan, I think strategy is not your problem. In some ways, I think you got some more strategic things figured out than I do. But can I tell you what made the biggest difference in our church and in my leadership and myself as a person? Yeah, that's why I'm calling you. Give me the silver bullet. He said, I found my 2 best hours of the week, my 2 most productive hours of the week. I'm like, okay, yeah. And I fasted and prayed in those. About your message for Sunday? No. Did you use that as an illustration? No. I just fasted and prayed. I prayed without ceasing. I prayed with a determination, and I fasted in those 2 hours, my best 2 hours of the week. And he's like, that nothing changed our church more than that. I thought about it. I wrote it down. I looked at my calendar, and I was like, I think I got 10 minutes over here. Honestly, it went in one ear and went out the other. It's not tangible. That's not going to work. I need something more concrete. And maybe some of you think that today. I just need something more concrete. Well, fast forward to late November, early December this year. Walking in December, busy season. I spoke twice. We had a Christmas production. You guys, there was one here. There's one at West Hills. And our team worked so hard. That theater at Belmont High School has never looked so good. Our team just killed it. They just did such a good job. We filled the theater twice. It was such a good experience. It took so much work, and I just was in a funk. It did nothing for me. I was tired. was exhausted. It was such a good night, and it just did nothing to my soul. Oprah Winfrey could have attended, and it wouldn't have changed anything. Celine Dion could have led Silent Night at the end, and I would have been, it's okay. Whatever, Selena. I was in a funk. I was hoping that the Christmas break after Christmas, I'd be able to just have some much needed rest and be rejuvenated, and I got sick. 2020 came, a new decade, brand new year. So excited. I had nothing. I'm usually a guy who loves goals. I'm just like all about those fresh starts, and I just walked into 2020 feeling tired. Oh, I'm tired, and we got church again, and I just felt like I had nothing to my team. Our first team night, our lead team at West Hills, the first night, this is how I start the night for New Year. Guys, I feel like I got nothing. That's what I said. They were really inspired after that. I just feel like I got nothing to give. So I'm going to do the one thing. I'm going to do one thing that might change everything. Our year at GT always starts the same way. We start with 20 days of prayer. And I walked in 2020 feeling tired, so listen, I decided I'm going to make some shifts. I'm going to commit to prayer in this season. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to give up some other things. I'm going to get rid of some other habits. I'm going to fast from some things. I'm going to be committed to prayer. Every Saturday at noon at prayer, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be excited for that. Me and Amy, we're going to pray more than we've ever had before. And it's not like nothing changed right away. I still felt tired and discouraged. I felt like in a funk. I felt stuck. But then we had this prayer meeting at a dance studio downtown. Some of you were there. At noon. And we were just singing songs, and we just were worshiping and praying, and I just there, and I just was thinking that 90-some years ago, a group of followers of Jesus gathered in that spot and had a belief, and had a vision, and had a purpose. And 90-some years ago, this is our third campus, starting a fourth one this fall, and all of you are here. And I thought about it. What did they have back then that I need today? They just had a little spot where they gathered and prayed and sang songs. What did they have that I needed? Well, they didn't really have anything. They didn't have like a cool sound system. They didn't have this. They didn't have that. They didn't have a lot of things, but they had God. And I realized when you feel like you got nothing, you still have God. I felt like I had nothing, and I walked in that season, and I walked away from that night saying, these people were resilient. Not because they read a book from Harvard Business Review, not because they had time hacks, not because they had the right podcast or the right leadership stuff. They were resilient because they depended on God for something that they could not produce. I'm inviting the band to come up, and would you stand with me? We're going to close. Some of you today, either right now or there's been seasons of your life you feel stuck. You feel like the weight of life or the circumstance around you, you just feel stuck right now. You feel tired. You feel exhausted. You don't want to keep on going. Maybe that's you right now. Can I just encourage you in this moment? I think this is for somebody. Don't give up. Don't give up. Because your life might feel broken. Your circumstances might be all a mess. But God loves to make something beautiful out of our brokenness. And this life might take everything from you and things from left and right. And when it rains, it pours, and you feel like there's no sight, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But I can tell you one thing that this life can't take from you, and that's God's presence in your life. And so listen, we're going to sing one more time, and I don't know one other way to end than you to reach out and surrender to the God who made you, the God who loves you, the God who paid the ultimate price for you. Because listen, I got nothing else for you. I only can tell you about Jesus. And in this moment, why would you not reach out to him? Why would you not reach out to the God who just wants to fill you with strength, fill you with inspiration beyond what you can take? So listen, this is an environment where this is a moment. So don't think about lunch, don't think about where you need to go, but be like a person who hasn't ate for days and there's a plate right in front of you full of food. Feast, for the Lord is good. Dwell on him. Finish him. So Father, we make a declaration right now in this moment. God, you would be everything that we need. God, I just pray for anyone in this room that feels tired, that feels like giving up, that doesn't want to keep on running, that doesn't want to press into the things you have for them. Holy Spirit, we ask for an infusion of your power, of your strength, of your encouragement on us today. God, may we surrender. May we not lean on our own strengths, may we not lean on our pride and our abilities, but God, may we just open our arms, open our hands, and say, God, we need you today. God, I feel like I got nothing, so I need more of you. So may we be a people that surrender to the Almighty God. Father, may you just begin to rejuvenate hearts. May you begin to feel love, feel compassion in every individual. God, may we be people that are resilient, not because of our ability or our strengths, but because of the goodness that is found in you. We ask all this in your wonderful and